Hi, my name is Rémi Orsier, and I'm the director of the DOCIP Foundation. So today I will talk to you about archives, and the title of this webinar is Archives to Defend Indigenous Rights and Preserve the Memory of Indigenous People, DOCIP's Role and Challenges. So before we begin, we would like to thank the ICDH for inviting us to participate in their webinar, which will allow us to present the important work of our organization in the defense of Indigenous people's rights. I would personally also like to thank my colleagues who made most of the work to prepare this webinar, namely Federica Pecci, Magali Delaloy, Anne-Charlotte Lagrancourt, and Mathias Ouida. Since its creation, the Indigenous Peoples Center for Documentation, Research and Information, or DOCIP, carries out its activities according to the principles of impartiality, neutrality, collegiality, and non-interference, respecting the fundamental principle of self-determination of Indigenous peoples. To this end, we carry out our technical support, our legal and advocacy actions, and activities directly requested by Indigenous delegates or organizations. They are also consulted during and after they receive our support. We favor collective work with Indigenous delegates and alongside technical services such as interpretation at international events and strategic services. The Documentation Center is at the heart of DOCIP. It is precisely this aspect of our work that I'm presenting to you today. My presentation will be divided into 4 parts. The first part will look back at the events which led to the foundation of DOCIP in 1978 and introduce the main functions of our archives today. In the second part, I will share examples illustrating the importance of our archives for the defense of Indigenous people's rights. The third part will address the sensitive question of DOCIP's neutrality, as the NGO is a place to centralize the storage of our documents and rescue endangered archives, and the reason for this choice by Indigenous delegates. Finally, the last section will show the current challenges faced by DOCIP in preserving dematerialized documents. So first, creation and development of DOCIP, documenting to support Indigenous people's rights. The birth of DOCIP in 1978 took place in a context of great activism of Indigenous peoples. The first Indigenous activism within the international arena dates back to 1923, when Chief Descarrés, representative of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of the Six Nations, also known at that time as Iroquois, arrived at the League of Nations in Geneva. But he was not only denied the right to have the sovereignty of his people recognized, but also denied the right to even address the League of Nations. It was only in the 1970s that the international indigenous movement really took off. For instance, in 1971, the UN Economic and Social Council adopted Resolution 1589, which authorized the Subcommission of Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities to conduct a study on the discrimination faced by Indigenous peoples. The Subcommission mandated José Martínez Cobo from Ecuador to conduct the study and appointed him as special rapporteur. At the same time, some Indigenous peoples organized themselves politically to claim their rights, particularly Indigenous peoples from the Americas. Under their pressure, the UN organized 2 major conferences in Geneva in which Indigenous delegates participated. The first conference, held in 1977, discussed the discrimination against Indigenous peoples of the Americas. On that occasion, Indigenous representatives made several statements. 1, they rejected the status of minorities and claimed the status of peoples. 2, they called for the revision of Convention 107 of the International Labour Organization. 3, they called for the creation of a UN working group to study the specific issues relating to indigenous peoples. 4, they called for the adoption of an international declaration on their collective rights. The second conference, held in 1978, was dedicated to the fight against racism and racial discrimination. On this occasion, several states recognized specific linguistic, cultural, economic, and territorial rights to indigenous peoples. It is in this context that DOCIP was created in 1978 on the initiative of the indigenous delegates participating in the first international conference on the rights of indigenous peoples in 1977 at the UN. It took place here in Geneva, Switzerland. At the request of these indigenous delegates, its primary function is to collect and preserve all documents and material related to indigenous peoples and their cultures produced within the framework of international organizations. The DOCIP archives, you can see some of them here around me, they have 4 main functions. 1, the DOCIP archives are intended to be an advocacy tool available to the parties to the various conventions and treaties relating to indigenous peoples' rights. Thus, the archives preserve evidence of previous commitments made in favor of indigenous peoples, whether at the international, regional, or local level. These materials are regularly relied upon by indigenous delegates and human rights professionals in support of their claims, or as a source of inspiration, or found in precedents that are potentially applicable to other situations of human rights violations. They act as a tool for the construction of the historical processes of the different peoples, to preserve the memory of their delegates' interventions. 3, they contribute to the preservation of the collective memory of the movement for the defense of indigenous peoples' rights, because it would be wrong to consider that the global indigenous movement as an association of circumstance between different peoples with common objectives. The indigenous world acts as a unified and supportive society united by a common identity. Finally, the DOCIP archives are an academic tool at the disposal of researchers, but particularly in the field of human rights, whatever their specialization. So, what do the documents in our archives consist of? Over the past decades, DOCIP has digitized more than 10,000 documents in text format and stored them in a database which now consists of a wide variety of sources and media, including historical documents, major reports, statements by indigenous peoples delegates or other international or governmental actors at international conferences, various General Assembly resolutions, symposium documents, international legal instruments, etc. The DOCIP database stores the document as submitted by indigenous delegates at the end of major conferences, as well as any handwritten notes added by the speaker. The physical documents are also specifically filed and stored on DOCIP's premises in Geneva. In 2017, the collection of declarations made by indigenous peoples representatives at the UN between 1982 and 2015 was inscribed on the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. This marks a great recognition of the relevance and usefulness of the DOCIP archives. Referring to the declaration included in this Memory of the World Register, UNESCO stressed that the proposed heritage includes unique documents created by indigenous peoples around the world on behalf of their communities. They contain legal, historical, cultural arguments and claims on various UN topics that are important for the development of international law, the advancement of indigenous peoples' rights at the national level, and the inspiration of younger generations. Besides retaining the material and digital versions of the contributions made by indigenous peoples' representatives during UN conferences, DOCIP also works to preserve their oral history and memory. In light of the aging of the first generation of indigenous representatives who spoke before the United Nations in the early 2000s, indigenous leaders called for an action to preserve their memories, which otherwise would have risked being lost. This announcement was welcomed during the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues in 2009. Two symposia were held in 2013 and in 2015 in Geneva, which aimed at collecting and disseminating the oral memory of the first indigenous delegates who participated in the negotiations before the United Nations. The main objectives of this collection of the entire history of indigenous advocacy were to ensure the training of new generation of delegates, but also to assess the progress of indigenous people's rights at the international level. Following these two symposia, DOCIP launched a project dedicated to generational transmission through workshops held in different regions of the indigenous world, bringing together old and young indigenous leaders in order to train the later memory preservation techniques. 3 workshops were held successively in North America, South America, and Africa. The next workshop should take place in Asia. While oral history programs are popular in many areas, they are particularly important for indigenous peoples. Indeed, memory is a crucial component of indigenous identities, and orality as its first is its first way of transmission. One of the current challenges of the Documentation Center is therefore to integrate this new data into the catalog of our archives, thanks to the expertise of indigenous peoples in this field. I would like now to speak about examples of the use of our archives. DOCIP received several requests for documentary research coming from a variety of actors, researchers and academics, international institutions, and of course, indigenous peoples themselves. In this regard, I would like to share a few examples of how DOCIP archives can be a valuable tool for indigenous communities. The first example illustrates the lack of recognition of the status of indigenous peoples and the case of the nomadic pastoralists in the Hangbok district of Amnogovi province in southern Mongolia. Until 2011, this area was relatively isolated and not of major economic interest. The situation changed rapidly with the discovery of gold and copper deposits in the Gobi Desert and the construction of Oyu Tolgoi, a mining complex created by the company Altain Khuder under the patronage of the Mongolian government. Construction began in 2011, forcing these indigenous people to collect mine waste in order to survive. In addition, the population of the area increased by more than 350% from 2,000 to 7,000 inhabitants. Miners diverted the course of the Hyundai River, in this way reducing access to water for livestock. The nomads witnessed helplessly the destruction of their way of life, the deterioration of their grazing lands, and the death of their camel herds. These mining installations were among the largest in the world and employed nearly 17,000 people, most of whom were Mongolians, so people easily forgot the obvious violations suffered by the nomadic populations. Thus, neither the mining company nor the state took responsibility for their situation. In 2012, the nomadic populations began to organize protests in front of the mine, demanding the exploitation of their lands to be stopped. As the project was partly financed by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. In 2014, representatives of the nomadic peoples of the region, advised by non-governmental organizations, decided to file a claim through the complaint mechanism created for the project financed by the bank. One of the key elements of the complaint was the fact that the nomadic pastoralists were denied recognition as an indigenous people by the mining company. Recognition was essential because the status of indigenous peoples allowed the nomads to complain about the lack of free, prior, and informed consent that the company Altai Hunde should have obtained beforehand. It also denounces the fact that the company did not make any effort to limit the use of indigenous territories. The United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples deliberately remains vague on the definition of indigenous peoples, in order not to be too restrictive, rather favoring the principles of self-recognition and self-determination. However, a group of people falls under this definition based on several elements, among which their recognition as indigenous peoples by the members of the indigenous movement at the international level. Thus, in order to prove their status, their complaint had to be accompanied by declarations made by a representative of the indigenous community at the UN, documents that are part of the collection kept by DOCIP. The representatives of the nomadic people won their case in 2017 with the support and assistance of international organizations such as Oyu Tolgoi Watch and the advice of mediators, and signed an agreement safeguarding the rights of the nomads and residents of Hangbot district. More than 60 action plans on pastoralism, water, financial compensation, including support for nomadic livelihoods, environmental management, and reintegration have been implemented since. As a second example, in 2019 alone, the International Human Rights Defender Memorial listed the names of 304 murdered human rights defenders. Almost 40% of them worked on issues related to territories and environmental and indigenous people's rights, and many of them were indigenous. When human rights defenders apply to the various existing emergency protection mechanisms, they must first prove that their safety is at risk as a result of their activism. The database kept by DOCIP allows them to quickly build their support file, highlighting their participation in certain conferences or human rights protection mechanisms to prove their status as a human rights defender. Finally, DOCIP's database is often used by indigenous peoples and representatives to retrace the history of their claims and to rely on previous statements to claim their rights. For example, DOCIP's documentary material provides evidence that indigenous peoples' representatives started witnessing climate change long before its effects became visible worldwide. Interventions from several decades testified to the concern of Arctic people who saw the ice retreating, of inhabitants of primary forests who saw them burning, and of nomadic African pastoralists who have to relocate age-old transhumance corridors in order to find water points for their animals. In this regard, we could mention the potential use of these documents with respect to the current debate on the liability for climate change and the duty to respond for the loss and damage suffered by certain communities and countries, so central during the COP27. In the same direction, but on a more theoretical level, these documents can foster the discourse of those who question the term Anthropocene and call for its decolonization. So now we come to the third part of this presentation. Choosing DOCIP to centralize documentation, the question of endangered archives. While DOCIP represents a significant resource for the defense of indigenous people's rights, it is also a neutral place, with all the limitations that this term implies. to provide a space for archives that are at risk or difficult to access. Indeed, it would be legitimate to ask why indigenous delegates have not directly asked the UN or their governmental bodies to safeguard their archives. At the time of the creation of DOCIP, the indigenous representatives holding their first conference in Geneva did not trust their respective governments. They wanted their documents, and by extension their memory, to remain in the hands of an entity that was not involved in the discussions between their peoples and the various states. Furthermore, indigenous representatives thought, and most of them keep thinking, that the United Nations, as a group of states, is not sufficiently neutral to grant them the secure preservation of their archives. Thus, DOCIP, as a non-governmental organization located close to the UN, in a country not considered to have played a major or direct role in the disenfranchisement of indigenous peoples, was able to maintain neutrality in the preservation of this documentation. Indigenous peoples face many difficulties due to the almost systematic lack of access to documentary resources. This lack of access is of particular importance and potentially tragic when indigenous delegates find themselves involved in legal disputes with the authorities of their own countries or with other actors intervening on their territories, such as the private economic sector, for example. These conflicts can arise from questioning the motives for their participation or presence at international conferences, particularly when human rights violations are reported, or when their governments simply ask them to prove their identity as indigenous peoples. There are plenty of examples, such as the systematic repression exerted by the Brazilian government against Amazonian Indians who participate in UN conferences, or the reluctance of several countries to apply the notion of indigenousness within their national context. In addition to preserving documents, DOCIP guarantees free and unlimited access to its database and authorizes the use of official documents that may provide elements for reflection or even evidence in litigation. In this sense, our archives also contain documents proving both the participation of indigenous delegates in international processes and their recognition as indigenous peoples by international bodies. We now come to the fourth part of this presentation, so I will talk about the current challenges of preserving dematerialized documents. So DOCIP is now at a crossroads and is undergoing a major reorganization project to meet international archival requirements and incorporate new types of documents provided by indigenous peoples. However, in the face of the technical innovations that have become widespread within UN entities, the most important and sensitive issue today is the diversification of the modalities of intervention of delegates, both indigenous and non-indigenous, at the main UN conferences. The practice of so-called interactive dialogues sessions is becoming largely used to the extent that some conferences, such as the UN Business and Human Rights Forum, now operate solely on this basis. While the objective of energizing and initiating dialogue between participants is highly recommendable, this modality of participation poses significant difficulties when it comes to preserving the statements made by indigenous representatives during these conferences. Often, during conferences adopting the modality of the interactive dialogue, there is no production of written material to be disseminated on documentation platforms. In these cases, it would be advisable to record the conferences and store the recording. The UN does provide a broadcasting service, but it is not systematic and the conservation of the videos is limited in time. The implementation of systematic and accessible video recording and storage services poses various challenges that must be addressed in the future. First, there are technical difficulties, as not all of the sessions are necessarily filmed. Another technical difficulty is the platform on which the video will be made available and how they can be found by a researcher. The care with which the archiving will be conducted will then have to be particularly meticulous, notably in the use of detailed metadata and the standardization of these. Finally, the storage of video requires a significant amount of digital data storage space, which needs to be maintained regularly. In addition, there may be security issues associated with video capture. Indeed, these conferences are attended by human rights defenders whose lives may be at risk. The safety of the participants is therefore a top priority. And while the fact that they are speaking at a UN forum may be seen as a de facto acceptance of the risk involved in speaking, particular attention should be paid to their appearance in cutaways or in the background when another speaker is speaking, which may be problematic and even endanger them. There are also potential legal problems. Capturing and archiving speaker speeches on a large scale would inevitably require an agreement with the United Nations as the organizing body of the conferences and the owner of the venues in which they take place. Since the United Nations cannot be defined as neutral by nature, the possibility of reaching an agreement might be hindered by some states willing to limit the storage of certain declarations and trace certain voices they want to remain silent. Other fundamental questions are raised by the choice of interactive dialogue as the sole modality of intervention, particularly for indigenous delegates, that of representativeness or that of an expression restricted by a condition defined by the organizers. Implementing participation on the basis of interactive dialogue requires organizers to be attentive to the way in which the floor is allocated to each person. It is possible that the widespread use of interactive dialogues will favor the more experienced speakers, leaving out delegates less accustomed to participating in international events. Some delegates or some indigenous organizations are well aware of the challenges associated with these new ways of participating in international conferences. In order to contribute to the archiving work, which could be useful for future advocacy or even reparation actions, they may use their speaking time to make a more formal statement, leaving a copy with DOCIP, which will archive it and make it available. For example, FIMI, Foro Internacional de Mujeres Indígenas, recommends that its members go to several separate parallel events so they can read the same statement. But these are only one-off interventions that depend mainly on the individual consciousness of the delegates and not a systematic form of document collection. We now come to the conclusion of this webinar. So to conclude, in this presentation, I hope to have shown you the key role the documents collected by DOCIP play to defend indigenous people's rights and how they preserve their memory. These archives become a powerful tool in the struggle for the recognition of their rights at the international level. Through its principle of non-interference and its recognition of indigenous people's rights to self-determination, as well as through the involvement of indigenous peoples themselves in the processes, DOCIP has become a trusted actor. By depositing their documents in Geneva, they ensure full access to materials that might be subject to restriction in state archives, ranging from administrative hassle to denial of access. As the states are stakeholders in the debates, their archives cannot guarantee the necessary neutrality in the management of these funds. Unlike DOCIP, which thus participates in the constitution of an indigenous collective memory through its freely accessible documentary heritage. The proper preservation of the memory of indigenous peoples is a symbol of resilience and must above all remain a tool at their service, highly adapted and adaptable in the resolution of present-day problems. When we think of archives, we think first of all of state tools which in a sense document the history of state power. Indigenous communities reappropriate this means, remodel it. Usually archives contain mostly written documents, in this case recording of oral testimonies, objects, etc., and rely on it to have a dialogue with state authorities through a language that the latter can understand to claim their rights. The DOCIP archives illustrate the importance of both historical and recent sources in defending the rights of discriminated groups. They document the pivotal role played by indigenous peoples in the current international debate around climate change and the mitigation of the current global crisis. The most prominent example in their significant place at the negotiating table on climate change issues. Indigenous peoples are particularly affected by a global climate crisis, which is putting their habitats, culture, and life at risk. Yet, in 2017, the Conference of Parties, COP, recognized the leading role of indigenous peoples in protecting forests and keeping global temperatures down. It also defined the purpose and function of the local communities and indigenous peoples platform, which should enhance local communities and indigenous peoples' knowledge, technologies, practices, and efforts related to addressing climate change, facilitate the exchange of experience and sharing of best practice and lessons learned on mitigation and adaptation in a comprehensive and integrated manner, and enhance the participation of local communities and indigenous peoples in the convention process. Indigenous peoples are thus recognized as privileged interlocutors in the fight against global warming and as the guardians of biodiversity. 80% of the planet's remaining biodiversity is located on indigenous peoples' land. They are no longer just victims of global warming, but because of their documented expertise, the bearers of solutions to this crisis. Thank you very much for having listened to me, and thanks to ICDH once more.
Hello everyone, my name is Song Petra. I am the head of the archive in Tuts Lang Genocide Museum in Cambodia. Today, I'm really glad that I have a chance to share about what we are working in Tuts Lang Genocide Museum, and especially to share about the background of the archive in Tuts Lang. To cover on my presentation, I would like to share about 5 main points with all of you. The first is about the historical background of the archive. This would be, I try to answer about the short question regarding to the question why the archive is existing in the site of the prison, which later became the Tuts Lang Genocide Museum. And second, I will try to brief about the archival preservation after the Khmer Rouge, because after the creation in 1975 to 1979, the archive was later considered as the heritage property for the countries, which has been preserved by many Cambodian and international experts to join to make sure that this archive of the Khmer Rouge at Tuts Lang Genocide Museum are existing. The third point, I will describe about different use of the archive, It would be also related to the accessibility and also how the archive is important for Cambodian people, for researcher, for juridical investigator, and also for the other people. The fourth, I will try to describe about the digitization because since 2017 to 2020, the archive have been digitization. At that time, that most of our collection have been preserved and digitized. And the last point, I will talk about the vision of the archive and also of the museum, because the main strategy that we try to integrate, we try to involve the young people in this archive preservation. And you can see example as I am one of the youth and I have chance to work in the archive. This is one of the only chance. However, I think that this presentation would encourage other people, especially the young people, to have a chance like me to work in the archive. So, first, it's about the historical background of the archive. Um, to, to the people who might be not really familiar about the Cambodia, I will start about the general background of the country. So you might know that the Cambodia is a small country located in Southeast Asia, which is many people know this country, especially about the Vietnamese War in 1960 or 1970. So in Cambodia, it's a part of the war which is happened during the Cold War. The civil war in Cambodia has started in 1970 to 1991, with at that time different groups of ideologies fighting, and then in 1975, a part of the group which was at that time called Khmer Rouge, or the communist groups, came to power and they start to implement it, the communist dictatorship extremely ideologies. So during the Khmer Rouge, many people have aware about different memories regarding to the hardworking, starvation, and another difficult situation for Cambodian people. To put in short, 1.7 million of Cambodian people have been died because of the killing and because of the other situation. With this kind of the communist leadership and also the extremely ideology of the Khmer Rouge, we have found that there was such as big amounts of the prison which have been created by the Khmer Rouge between 1975 to 1979. So S21 prison, which later became Tuos Lai Genocide Museum, is one of these prisons. But S21 was the top of the prison of the Khmer Rouge, which you can see in the map that many people who have been arrested in different areas of the country later on have been sent to S21, which is located in the capital city of Phnom Penh. Approximately, there was almost 20,000 of people have been killed in this prison. So what is the function of S21? If you can see in this image, it is a brief one to describe about the general situation of the prison, which is now existing most of this historical evidence, like a cell, like a charcoal, and like many things that it will be enough to describe about what happened at that time. So according to research, we found out that S21 has been created to function for, first, to arrest people and to send to the prison. Second, to detain. So the third, the interrogation have to be applied with the torture, and the main point of this torture is to find the information from the people which have been accused as the enemy of the state. And last one, this prison also function to kill people. It might be a bit different to the other prison in the country. S21 was the top, and no one would be released from this prison according to our archive collection. So, based on this process, based on this mechanism process of the S21, there was a lot of documents have been remained. For example, when people have been sent to the prison, there was list down on the entry list, and then they were sent to imprisoned. People have been registered in imprisoned list, or when they was interrogated, they were list on the interrogation list. So there was many different type of bureaucratic documentation which have been done during the S21. We also have the other collection which is helpful to understand about that situation, like the confession and also the biography, which we can identify who was the victims of this prison. And the other, there also kind of the Khmer Rouge documentation record which have been remained, for example, like the report, notebook, letter, etc. So in the general process of the S21, we see the administrative documentation have been happened, and this is so important for us, which is right now 700,000 pages of document existing, and we know that more documents have been created, but we could not identify all of that. So you can see the picture that it is not appropriate one, but it is one of the only source that we can see the people or the detainee have been tortured until died, and this image you can see the surrounding of the body. There was the mess of documents, and it would be happen when someone have been interrogated and tortured. So this is a kind of the violent process of documentation in S21. So based on this document, for us, it's really important that we can understand about different crimes have been created in the size between 1975 to 1979. And we in deep to the content of the document, especially for the confession and report and also the other information from the Khmer staff record. We can see about their ideologies, how extremely that they was considered the people as the enemy for them and also for the state. And the last one, this information give us a significant research to understand about the amount of the people who has been killed, which right now we have information about more than 18,000 people, including male, females, and children, which have been arrested and killed in this S21 prison. So this is an image of about different collection which is existing, like I mentioned in previous slide, which is including confession, publication of the Khmer Rouge, biography, and also the other type of document. So, in 1979, the Khmer Rouge have been removed, and then the site of S21 was abandoned. But even it was removed, we know that S21 was functioned until the last day of the Khmer Rouge. So in 7 January 1979, the information from the Khmer Rouge staff said that there was left over all the document here, and then they was trying to run out the city because the wars have been starting and the country have been liberated. So many documents have been left over, and it was not keeping well, and we don't know clearly that maybe some of that have been destroyed or not. But because of this unwell organized, and the mass of documents have been found out in different areas of the capital, which later on the team of Du Slang started to organize this document and created the archive. However, in the situation in 1979 or 1980, with the rough time and also with limited resource, the archiving at that time have been done so quick, and we still have a lot of questions to understand, because even most of the people have been brought to S21, but no one would be survived except some people around 7 people who have been survived. But we still have a lot of questions about their archiving, about what happened in S21 documentation and how this prison have been have archiving their collection. For example, we don't know about the historical administrative of S21, because now those collection was keeping in different way of what it was created. And the second point, we lost many information about the victim, which we don't know right now how many people would be brought to S21. It might be much more than what we have information. So the main important point for archiving in 1979, for sure, it was the part of the evidence to understand about what happened in the former prison S21, and also because it's part of the judicial process. So you can see in the image that the trial had been started immediately after the collapse of the Khmer Rouge leader in 1979. So the tribunal was called at that time People Revolutionary Tribunal, which was considered to trial against the Khmer Rouge top leader Pol Pot and Ieng Sary. But we know that even this top leader was in charge for everything in the country. Many is documented at S21, and the crime which have done in S21 was important part of the tribunal. So many documents have been investigated, have been catalogued, and also many investigators have been sent to the Tus Laing Genocide Museum archive to access and to review all those documents. This way of the investigation was not end, and the judicial process for Cambodian people continues until recently, which is extraordinary chamber in the court of Cambodia, which is still starting its workings, and the investigation have collected a lot of the evidence and also important information that they brought from the archive to trial against some Khmer Rouge leader, which was now considered as a part of the genocide and also the crime against humanity. So I would like to say that among this trial, especially in ECCC in 2009, one of the Khmer Rouge leader was found that there was the head of the S21 prison named Kang Kit Yew alias Dutch. He was trialed for a life in prison, and many of information and also what he said is so important for us to understand about the documentation in the S21. And the document in S21 also contribute a lot to find the evidence to identify the responsibility of these Khmer Rouge leaders. So beside the judicial process, the collection in S21, or which later considered as a Tus Laing Genocide Museum archive, there was many research have been done, because after the Khmer Rouge, many Cambodian people and also for the foreigner consider the Khmer Rouge as one of the tragedy history for Cambodia. Many topics have been done, and many scholars came to Cambodia access to the archive collection. For example, I can show in these slides that you can see, such as the big publication about Cambodia, about the Khmer Rouge, about S21 prisons, and even some have been done in the way of the story of individual, which is like Bopana is victims of the S21, and her story was written by a journalist, and which is later on is so important to understand about what happened to the victim. So many research still comes and access to the collection to support their publication. And we also know that there was many researchers as a Cambodian people who apply for their studies, also to apply for their research, which has been done also in Cambodia. And according to the information from our access staff, we found out that the researchers are including different professional fields. For example, like they are the graduate students, they are professors, they are journalists, they are filmmakers, which all of them are contributed to disseminate about the history of the Khmer Rouge, about the history of F21, etc. Besides this juridical and academic use, archive is important mainly for local Cambodian people and also Cambodian refugees to understand about what happened to their families. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, that male, female children have been sent to S21 and killed. Their family members was not aware clearly about what happened to their family member during the Khmer Rouge. So after the 1979, many of Cambodians tried out to go in different places in the country to find their relative, and that time the archive of the museum have been public by providing exhibition with the many portraits of the victim in S21 to show to the Cambodian people. So you can see in the slides, which is the old man looking to the mugshot of the Tus Laing Genocide Museum. We try to identify about their family member or their relative of their friends. So this would be considered as a part of reconciliation for Cambodian people, because after war, people at least should understand what happened to their family member. So at the museums until today I'm working at this place, we still see that the people came to search for their relative. So the museum try to support this searching by providing staff to search the information, to interview and to identify the information from the archive to make sure that the people could get this information. So in this purpose of the humanities and the use of the archive to search for the relatives, which I would say that this is one of the reasons why Tuslan Genocide Museum was created in 1979. Because if someone used to came in Cambodia and visit the archive in 1979 or 80, you would see the mugshot, many mugshot of the victim have been displayed. And until now, that the main exhibition for the museum is displaying this mugshot. So one of the reasons why the museum created it would be applied to disseminate this archive collection for Cambodian people. So this kind of the searching information about relatives still continuously, like I mentioned. So this is the image in 2022, which I found that there was a man who came and searched for his father information, but this searching of the archive, it also linked to the commemoration ceremony, because for Cambodians belief, even the people who have been died, but their spirits still be alive until their family member, until their children, and doing some spiritual ceremonies. For example, like this image, the man who found out the information brought his family, including his sibling and the other who still survived, to the museum, and then to recognize that now they found this information, so they try to rest the peace of his father. And I found he told me a few days later that when he finished this ceremony at the museum, he conducted the ceremony at the hometown to inform to the local people and also to the Buddhist monks about this finding information. And he also became the monk for a few days in the perspective of the Cambodian Buddhism, to dedicate and to wish his father for rest in peace. So the understanding about the archive for me is not only to support in different fields of research or for judicial, but the linking between information of the archive into the memory of the people is so important, because the people would able to find and to do something related to this information. And with this regard of the important, that's why in 2009, the collection of the Tuslan Genocide Museum, which you can see the information on the slides, photographic, negative, biography, confession list, notebook, other documents, etc., have been registered in the memory of the world. The value is so important because the document was created in the site of the prisons, and then it was continuously used by the people for their understanding about what happened at their times and also what happened at that place. In 2020, the team have been successfully awarded the GG Prize because of our well preservation which have been done in Cambodia. So technically about the preservation, I would like to share about our archival digitization. Mainly it was started in 2018 to 2020, which at that time our museum was supported by Ministry of Culture and Fine Art, the UNESCO office in Phnom Penh, and also the funded by KOICA. We have digitized almost 500,000 pages of our collection. However, the digitize is the one thing, but the main thing is in that project, our staff have been trained for preservation works, for conservation work, for digital techniques, for indexing, and also for supporting the long-term one to apply for our museum archives work. So this project is such as, for me, the result of the project is a digital image for sure, but something which is take place for long for us is about the training to the staff and to engage the young people to join with this digital digitization. So what is the outcome from this digitalized, archival digitization? I can briefly about two main points. It is about the opportunity, and it might be another one is about the challenge, which it would be good to share with the other institutions before they start digitizing. First, for opportunity for us and also for Cambodian people, it is to access, to use all of this information easily than before, because before 2017 or 2018, when people want to search for information, they have to come to museum, looking to the photo or looking to the name which is listed on the museum exhibition. So this way we have starting since 1979 until 2007 or 2008. But for digital archive, you can just go to the website of the museums and then you search for this information. The name of the people have been appeared. Based on this, we have many records that they try to access about the website, and they send us the information that they have matched the information in the archive website into their family's member identification. Second point, because we have digitized most of the collection, so many research able to use this digital, we can prevent this use from the original one, because we always have a problem which is many collection which existing in the museum have been get more and more fragile, but with this digital we can preserve much more better, and only raw case that we provide the access to the original record. The third one is about the dissemination, because you may be aware that using the archive is one of the important, but not too many people are understand well of this heritage document access, or maybe sometimes students at high school or at secondary school, the using the archive is something that they would be not really apply for their education. So it would be only many people who are in the field of the history or in the field of the investigator or in the field of the high education. But what we want to disseminate is not only this kind of critical history, but for many people, for general people who are just recently access to digital platform, or who want to know a little bit on the history, for example, for like young people. They might question about something small thing, what happened at the museum, what happened at the prison, so on. So I think for digital access and digital archive, we try to disseminate much more easier. Like you can see one's image on the slides, that photo collection which we digitalize from the wall of the museum. It is a graffiti written by the victims. Just few hours after we post, many people impressed on that. They got this attracted by this information. They share with us, and this is one of the most powerful comments that we got from the digital user in Cambodia. However, according to our experience in 2020, when our archive partly have been digitalized, we found out some challenging, which is, I think it is good to share with you, and we can discuss together how we can deal with the situation. First, about preservation capacity, because working in digital era, the people have to be familiar with digital platform, have to be digital preservation. What should we do with digital file to make sure that those will be usable and would be keeping much more longer? And so if the limited of human resource, this have to be reconsidered for many institutions who might be the small institution, the small archive or something, have to care about that. So digital preservation sometimes is also required for payment. So this payment have to be regular and sustainable, prepare for the institution. So for institutions who consider for digitization, I think technically and policy have to be considered in the beginning. For our museum, we started with our access policy for sure, but we still have many questions, which is some people might not really aware or might not really respect to this use of the collection. Like I mentioned in the beginning, that the collection of the museum or of the Tuslan Genocide Museum archive is a bit different from general archive because it is created under the violence, created under the torture. Many photo I was not happy for people because we don't know that how the Khmerus did torture to the people before they can take that photo. So the ethnic use is so important. We had the cases in our museum in 2021 April, because at that time, one of the foreigners photographer tried to select some of the portrait from our archives digital, and then to try to Photoshop and smiling this victim's photo. And then many of the Cambodian and international researcher or international friends who know about what happened in S21 try to criticize. So you can see this is quite of the small collection that I put on the slide, which is about how critical have been discussed during that time. So we have this found out that he used this digital in the way that he don't understand what happens before, what happens on the victim, and what happened under the violence. So the policy is so important. And the second one is about the reason of the use. I think it also have to consider about the business one, because every collection of the archive, the value is so important, and some people take the chance to get this access to use in their business. We have the case in our archive that people downloaded that some archive material. People read this collection and earn the money in YouTube channel. So this is happen quite often. So we as the archivists, we are not only preserve the record or preserve the digital record, but we also work to preserve the ethnic of the use also. But however, these digital areas we cannot control in overall. So we need the access policy with the ethical policy, which is really strong to make sure that the collection would be respected by the user. My last point, I want to share about what that we are working at the moment and the vision in the future. I want to let you know that at the moment, the archive team is a part of the Tuslan Genocide Museum, which we applying some policies and we function to identifying the Khmer heritage collection, because we not only preserve the collection of the S21, but we also have the other collection that we receive from the people and related to the Khmer history, related to S21, and we preserve this collection. We have a team to preserve, to digitalize, and to conserve the archive record, which is fragile or which is required to be conserved. And we also provide the access and disseminate the information. But for museum, this is archive is a part of that, and the museum in the main point, museum is role for education and for dissemination. And currently, we have one of the most visit place in Cambodia, which is however, the most of the visitor for the museum is the foreigner, but now since 2014 that the number of the visitors have been increasing for Cambodian youth. This is so important to see the trend of the trends of this increasing is much more impact to the museum and also to the archive. Okay, so this is a picture about this archival resource preservation. So we have digital, we have original, we have object, we have data, and we also working with digital platform to control and to manage our information and our collection. So this aspect of the engagement, the young people, you can see clearly in our vision and mission. Tuslan Genocide Museum look forward to a peaceful and stable Cambodia in which as the historical museum and memorial site. It has helped society recover from the pains and sufferings of decades of wars and mass graves and has contributed to making the world more peaceful. So to contribute to this vision, our mission is to connect the museum to what happened in the past, to make sure that the history has been preserved, to make sure the archive has been preserved well, and then to connect the museum to the Cambodian people. It means that everyone of the Cambodia could access to visit the museum, could access to understand what happened in the past of the Cambodia, and then to understand what existing in the archive collection. So we try to open for the user as a Cambodian people and also for the other user. And the third, we connect to the world because the museum is not only important and valuable for Cambodian people. International society and also the foreigner, like the young people from the outside country, should have chance to understand about what happened in Cambodia and what happened in the site of the museum. And the last one, to make all these three missions complete in this 5 years from 2021 to 2025, our strategic plan, which want to build a professional organization for the institution, and also which want to provide this professionalism for our archive staff. So besides working and applying this vision, we see that the youth is so important. Like I mentioned that most of the Cambodian visitors who visit the archive, they are the youth. So we have to think, what should we take this opportunity of the youth visitor to the museum, especially to the archive work. So in the archive field, we try to include and we try to engage the youth into different aspects. For example, you can see that the youth join with us on preservation, on digitization, and also on disseminate and use of the collection. So in every stage of the archive work in our museum, the youth is so important because only the youth who understand about what is their need, what is their classmate want, what is their requirement for the school, what is their requirement for society. So we try to provide this opportunity for them to join with us and then to understand much more clearer of the archive. Based on this strong connection, we hope that the youth would know about the value of the heritage document of the museums, and we also think that they would be applied for their livings and for their future career. So in general, the youth for us is so the important target to integrate for the work at the archive of museum. That's all from me. I hope that you can got some basic point of the archive and our vision, and I'm welcome for the question. Thank you so much.